All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm going to start out by acknowledging the traditional territories that we're on. We acknowledge that we're gathered here today on stolen and occupied Cayuga Nation territories. The Cayuga Nation is one of 6 nations that make up the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, along with the Seneca, the Tuscarora, the Onondaga, the Oneida, and the Mohawk. It is a fact that Ithaca was founded upon the ruins of a Haudenosaunee community that was cleared through acts of terrorism during the Scorched Earth campaign in 1779, which was carried out by Sullivan, Clinton, and Washington. The immediate object of that campaign was the, quote, total destruction and devastation of Haudenosaunee settlements, and to, quote, capture as many prisoners of every age and sex as possible. George Washington instructed that the Haudenosaunee people must, quote, not be merely overrun, but destroyed, and that the total ruin of their settlements would guarantee the security of America's future. Once cleared, the land in this region was parceled out by the United States to wealthy, white Revolutionary War veterans, as slavery was still legal in New York State at that time. This is the brutal and bloody, often unspoken history of the land that we are now on. We must acknowledge that colonialism and genocide are ongoing. Indigenous people continue to be forcibly separated from their sacred ancestral homelands. These specific histories of white vigilante violence and white terror are intimately connected to police violence and mass incarceration targeting Native, Black, and other communities of color today. This land must be recognized as a site of struggle, resistance, and insurgency. Thank you. My name is Kathleen Stevens. I'm a cisgender queer woman of first-generation Asian American, Chinese ancestry. I grew up here on Cayuga Nation territory and Onondaga Nation territory as well. And I nearly avoided the school-to-prison pipeline and never graduated from high school, never got a degree or anything like that. So I seek to challenge the Academy and its position as the center of knowledge production, as well as the primary site of higher education. I'm also the founder and curator of Groundwork for Praxis, the organization who organized this event tonight. And a main focus of my work includes supporting the determination of Indigenous, Black, and other migrant, diasporic, and settler communities of color that are engaged in community self-defense, as well as relentlessly addressing inter-movement racism and the barriers that it presents to creating meaningful multiracial alliances in our movement spaces. As an Asian American, I understand my unique position as being both targeted by the forces of white supremacist colonial violence and encouraged and granted the opportunity to participate in anti-Black racism and the maintenance of the settler colonial project. It's with this knowledge in mind that I've worked to bring this discussion forward today and reach out to all these wonderful panelists who are here with me. Before we begin, I would like to thank the co-sponsors of this event who made this happen, which include the American Indian Program, the Alana Intercultural Board, the Society for Asian American Graduate Affairs, the Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán, MECHA, the Africana Studies and Research Center, the Workers Institute, Near Eastern Studies, Latino Studies Program, Creative Writing Program, Latino Graduate Students Coalition, Minority, Indigenous, and Third World Studies, Haven, the LGBTQ Student Union, the Goldson Lecture Series, Development Sociology, Department of Government, the Office of Academic and Diversity Initiatives, Critical Thought at Cornell, Decarceration Education at Cornell, Groundwork, Girls Fight Back, Bread and Roses, Environmental Justice Solidarity at Cornell, and Students for Justice in Palestine. I would also like to give a special thank you to Tyler the Reese-Spicer, without whom this event would not have been possible. And an additional thanks to Tatiana Sverjensky, Sam Shavar, Alex Gramillion, Layla Yunus, and Oz and John, who are doing sound and live streaming for us tonight. And I also want to remind everyone that this event is going to be recorded and archived for future use, and we are live streaming. Is anyone on camera, or is it just us? Okay, so we don't really have to worry about that, I guess. So I want to introduce the panel itself a little bit. Of course, this panel is going to center the voices and struggles of people whose identities place them uniquely at the intersections of multiple systems of oppression. They will speak about their lives, communities, and political work on the front lines of various struggles and resistance movements. I want to recognize that the concept of intersectionality itself is a concept born through Black feminism and coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. And we thank Patricia Hill Collins for her many contributions to the school of thought, and especially acknowledge her contribution of standpoint theory, which means people most targeted by oppressive forces are in the best position to both lead and to make sense of and describe violence on a structural level. Last night, we got together and put together a statement of solidarity that we'd like to read to you to help to frame the discussion tonight. It is our intent to frame the discussion this evening with a focus on colonial and white supremacist violence and the innumerable and often insidious manifestations that they appear, both within our broader society and in our movement spaces. As we come together, we acknowledge there could be no safe space in a settler colonial nation state in a world under the control of institutionalized systems of domination which threaten the earth and all of its inhabitants. As a result of these systems, we recognize continued and heightened attacks on Indigenous sovereignty, cultures, and livelihoods worldwide, and we seek to create confrontational spaces which challenge the normalization of white supremacist settler colonial violence.
We recognize that the phenomenon of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, queer and trans people is a direct consequence of the settler colonial project of elimination and extermination. We know that wherever invaders are, our bodies can be found left in trash cans. We know that wherever invaders are, rivers must be dredged and ditches must be searched to find our bodies. We recognize that attacks on Indigenous women are attacks on our clans, which are attacks on our governance structures, an attack on Indigenous nations themselves. We know the majority of perpetrators are white men, and we know these actions to be part of ongoing war and genocide on Indigenous peoples and our lands. We extend this scope and acknowledge the disappearances and murders of Black women, girls, queer and trans peoples, which remain almost completely ignored by mainstream media and perpetuate a legacy of specifically misogynistic violence. We acknowledge Black and Indigenous identities intersect and that the binary created is a tool of conquest to keep us from each other. We gather today on Trans Day of Remembrance. We seek to hold space for those stolen, missing, and murdered by the hands of a colonial society whose cis supremacy is so deeply intertwined with white power and patriarchy that the bodies and lives of trans women are relentlessly targeted. We miss you, we love you, and you are not forgotten.
Further, we understand settler colonialism and anti-Blackness to be co-constitutive of one another, and that these ongoing attacks against Indigenous peoples are inextricably linked to continued white supremacist terrorism against Black communities. The 2012 annual report, Operation Ghetto Storm, conducted by the Malcolm X grassroots movement, calculated that every 28 hours in 2012, someone employed or protected by the US government killed a Black man, woman, or child. This omnipresent threat to Black communities is genocide, and a part of the maintenance of structural anti-Blackness in service of the continuation of the settler colonial project.
We recognize the regularity of these occurrences as part of the legacy of lynching and the desensitization that is created by the media to the loss of Black life, as a part of an effort to normalize lynching and continue to impose a system of slavability onto the bodies of Black people. We are in support of the Ferguson insurrection and all Black-led resistance to white supremacist violence. We remind you to remember that while the governor of Missouri has issued a declaration of a state of emergency in an effort to contain and quell insurrection of Ferguson, systems of anti-Blackness and white supremacy force Black people in so-called America and beyond into a constant state of emergency.
As we are gathered here in the Africana Center at Cornell University, we acknowledge the legacy of Black student struggles to claim emancipated space for education in a supremely hostile environment. In 1969, Black student activists took over the Student Union building to demand a space and resources dedicated specifically to the knowledge production of peoples of African descent. Their efforts resulted in the creation of only the second Black studies within the U.S. empire, which held significant institutional autonomy and control over knowledge production, and became a model that many sought to achieve elsewhere. Africana Studies and Research Center's institutional autonomy has been attacked by the university here and racist campus elements repeatedly throughout its entire existence, since it was burned down in 1970 in a white supremacist arson attack, to repeated attempts to remove Africana's institutional autonomy, despite international campaigns to preserve the space as it was initially formed. This legacy of continued resistance is why this space continues to exist today.
We recognize the long legacy of indigenous and student-led resistance in the settler colonial nation known as Mexico, who along with the United States have created a militarized border zone which crosses the territories of many indigenous nations and perpetuates violence not only onto these nations of peoples but onto the bodies of migrants. We recognize these migrants as peoples who have been expelled and displaced from their homelands through the use of extractive and colonial violence, which forces them to follow the flow of capital for survival. We recognize that the 43 Ayotzinapa students did not just disappear, that they were kidnapped and are presumed dead, and that someone knows where those bodies are. These Ayotzinapa students represent just 43 of the millions of people who have been massacred and disappeared throughout both Mexico and the territories known as Central and South America. Further, we recognize the violence of all empires who colonially enforce borders.
We stand in solidarity with Palestinian people against the colonial forces of white supremacy embedded in the state of Israel, and we support the Palestinian call for a campaign of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, targeting the occupation and urge the use of a variety of direct action tactics to be employed to achieve this goal. We must acknowledge our universities' continued investment in apartheid and genocide through its collusion with corporations that profit from Israel's occupation, such as G4S, Tata Motors, Raytheon, Ingersoll-Rand, SodaStream, and Hewlett-Packard. We must also acknowledge Connor's partnership with Israeli University Technion in the construction of a $2 billion facility which serves to strengthen the Israeli military apparatus. We recognize that the corporation and paramilitary resources used to police and enforce the apartheid wall in Palestine also hover over the boundaries of our homelands and police the boundaries of indigenous people on both the Canada, US, and US-Mexico borders. We acknowledge that our struggles are tied intimately together as the same colonial tactics, such as the scourge air campaign, which can be used against our people in Anowarakoa, Kawanote, Turtle Island, are now being used against Palestinians in their own lands. We are connected through our grief for our homeland and through our relentless resistance. From the river to the sea, Palestina will be free.
We would like to acknowledge the fierce resistance of the Black Power and Indigenous sovereigntist movement in so-called Australia. To our relatives across many oceans whose bodies were shackled and chained as common practice up until the mid-70s, whose territories continue to be invaded by mining corporations and destroyed by extractive industries, whose peoples continue to survive the white supremacist penal colony known as Australia, the racism of which is described as 20,000 miles south of the deep south of Alabama. We acknowledge your resistance to the G20 meetings held in Brisbane earlier this November, aptly termed the Genocidal 20. We support your action to set ablaze the Australian flag, and we send gratitude to all those who continue to resist the global powers of colonial capitalism that lubricates the gears of its death machine with our blood. Our smoke and prayers connect with yours on our paths of resistance and resurgence, because we know that Australia has a Black history, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. From Haudenosaunee territory to Ferguson to Palestine, Ayotzinapa to Brisbane and so-called Australia, we take up this position of solidarity against the forces of white supremacist settler colonial violence. So thank you. We ask you to keep all of those words in mind as we move through this conversation tonight, because it will help to frame what we'll be talking about and where the conversation will go. And at this time, I'd like to ask my panelists to introduce themselves.
Sego Sewa Guego. This part's not going to be in English. Just Sego Sewa Guego. Yadi Waga Dirandade Sini Waxanoda Nokohoen Neha. Mandela Kuzinjits. Yadi Waga Dirandade Sini Waxanoda Nokohoen Neha. Denogenyoda. Nigarina Ondo. Onaduwaga Hodinishoni. I live in Jojage, which is so-called Montreal, Quebec. I belong to the Turtle Clan of the Seneca Nation. We self-reference as Onondawaga. We're people of the Great Hill, Haudenosaunee, building a longhouse. I am a queer two-spirited woman, and it's really powerful to be in the Finger Lakes region, a place from where my ancestors were displaced during the scorch earth campaigns. And I just want to remind everyone here in Cornell that Cayuga Lake, right, is where Ithaca is at the foot of. And when you look over that lake, you see those mounds and those hills. You're walking over our ancestors. You know, your feet are touching them. And so, for those of you who walk, you know, with Okohoen Neha in an indigenous way, for those of you whose blood comes from the land, you know, if you want to remember this and put down some tobacco in our way and just send some wako no weradon, love, thanks, and respect to our relatives who have been exhumed, stolen from their resting places, and who are still here waiting for justice to come to our territories and liberation. Yawa, thank you.
Loma, Yohabi Susan Matsiwa. Yohobi Nikon Komanti. Yohabi Omamuwa. I'm Suze, I'm queer, Hopi and Comanche. I'm from Sumopavi, Waterfront.
My name is Anika. I grew up in Syracuse, not too far from here. I currently live in Brooklyn and I'm studying archives at Queens College. I work with the Interference Archive, which just finished a show that I co-curated, Self-Determination Inside Out, about the struggles of incarcerated peoples and how they've transformed life on the outside. And I also just want to thank Kat for bringing this panel together. I'm really excited to be here.
We will enter Taika Habori Inti, Japanese Kashi Well. What's the guy's name? My name is Victor, and I originate from this country, South America, called Peru. My nation is the Yawa Nation, one of the major indigenous nations there. My clan is the Yaparilla clan, is the Red Macau clan. The Red Macau, that beautiful bird, is my ancestor, is my grandfather. We respect and honor them. Right now I live in Utah, in so-called Utah, Salt Lake City, the occupied territories of the Dene, Washoe, Shoshone, Paiute, and Ute nations. I work on 3 different organizations right now, you know, Utah Tarzan's Resistance, Peaceful Uprising, and the Bruce United Front, you know, organizations that we're fighting, you know, to protect the land, to protect our communities too. Yeah, it's an honor to be here, identified, of course, an indigenous person, but also because my life experience, I identify as a migrant person. You know, and I'm in solidarity with all my migrant people from all over the world, but especially from Mexico and Avenchala, you know, so-called South America. And thank you, Ruth, and all the people that put all this together and follow you to be here. You know, this is pretty awesome.
Hi, my name is Kristen Herbeck. It's listed differently on the thing, but whatever, move on. I'm from Jersey, Lenape territories, and I currently live in Minneapolis, Dakota territories with my partner. I've been working on community accountability geared toward prison abolition, ways to confront violence in communities and movement spaces that are completely out of the state and, you know, pull away from the state's ability to fuel violence against communities of color on the state level.
Hi, my name is Nancy Morales. I'm from Los Angeles, coming from parents of also first generation. My parents are from Mexico, from Oaxaca, and we're coming from also indigenous, you know, peoples from the Zapotecs.
Thank you so much. This is such a powerful group of people sitting here in front of you. And I'd like you all to give them a round of applause.